Hi, everybody. I want to welcome all of you to my latest episode where my guest, Tim Durling from Tim's Vinyl Confessions, and myself are going to be talking about our AC/DC collection. Now, AC/DC just recently, about a month ago, came out with a album that none of us, I think, expected in 2020, and it was called Power Up, which we'll be getting to. Again, Tim has an extensive collection of not only 80s hard rock, but 70s and 90s. He has some episodes where he talks about his 8-track tapes, which include some of his AC/DC 8-tracks. So definitely make sure you check his channel out. I know you're going to want to subscribe to it. He's got a lot of great videos. Today, we are going to talk exclusively about our AC/DC CD collection. And Tim, do you want to talk about how you first got into AC/DC?
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me again. And yeah, it's AC/DC is a band that I want to say I have vague memories of being about 6. So that would have been 1980. And I'm pretty sure I remember my cousin babysitting me and playing Back in Black. It's vague. And I could be wrong, but of course, I've been aware of AC/DC for quite a long time. Now, the funny thing is, Jeff, is that I never actually became a fan of AC/DC until the late 90s, for whatever reason. But in 1997, a bunch of friends and I went to see a really good AC/DC cover band, and they were called Hell's Bells, and they had a singer that could equally handle the Bon Scott and the Brian Johnson eras quite well, which are very different demands on your vocal cords. And I remember thinking how many of those songs I actually really liked. So that's why, as we'll find out, a lot of my CDs came from the 1994 Atlantic Remaster series, as opposed to being earlier than that, with a few exceptions. But yeah, 1994 Atlantic Remastered, Foreigner, Yes, Bad Company, Led Zeppelin, a lot of their big bands. And that's where a lot of mine come from. Although I do have a couple of cool things.
Okay. Yeah, I was, I think 11 or 12 when I first got interested in AC/DC, and it was a friend of mine. He had Dirty Deeds, Done Dirt Cheap, and Back in Black, both on vinyl. I believe he got them through the Columbia Record Club. And so he had those around and played them all the time. And then the very first album that I actually owned was, for those about to rock, We Salute You. This was one of the first singles that I ever bought with my own money, was the Let's Get It Up single. And so after that, I was into them, and then I kind of just lost track of a lot of what AC/DC was up to, because there was such a long space in between albums for them in the late 90s and early 2000s, and I've since been trying to catch my collection up. But we're going to start today, and and one of the things that I like about your AC/DC video, Tim, is that you talk about how the early Australian releases are much different from what we got in North America. And I believe AC/DC's first album in 1975 was actually called TNT, which I don't have a copy of, but I think you do.
Actually, yeah, the first album was High Voltage, and it came out in 1974. But we'll get into that when we talk about High Voltage. But yeah, the Australian CD releases, I mean, for years and years, the hardcore AC/DC fans have known that the first, 5 or 6 AC/DC albums differed in some way or another from their counterparts that were released in other parts of the world, with the cover art and a lot of times with songs. So the only one that I really bothered getting for a few reasons. Number one, a lot of them are really, I think, overpriced. And it just depends on your fandom. I like AC/DC, but they're not a band I'm going to spend $50 for a CD to get one song and a different album cover. But the one that I did seek out was relatively cheap, and it's also the one that has a unique title, because there was no, as you said, there's no North American AC/DC album called TNT. So this was the second Australian AC/DC album, and I'll take the cover out to show you what it looks like. It's one of the better ones. And this is probably a late 80s issue because it's just a single sleeve. And I'll go over the song titles because the song titles will be very familiar to a lot of people. That's the disc itself. It's on Albert Productions, which was their own, was George Young and Harry Vanda's production company, and a lot of Australian rock acts were on that. And this particular CD was distributed by CBS Australia. So I'm going to read you the track listing on here. There's 9 songs on here. It's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll singer, The Jack, Livewire, TNT, Rocker, Can I Sit Next to You, Girl, High Voltage, and School Days. 7 of the 9 songs on this CD, most people know as High Voltage, with a couple of exceptions. And that's one of the reasons that, this is one of the reasons I wanted to get this, because it had a different title, different cover art. But we'll get into the different track listings actually much later in this episode. But yeah, this is just fun because, like I said, there's no North American TNT album. There's just High Voltage that has the song TNT on it, and that's just the start of a lot of their how the albums didn't line up.
Right, and so High Voltage was the first North American album that we saw or were introduced to. Do you want to show your High Voltage CD?
Yeah, first thing I'll show you is, like, I had these printed out a long time ago when I had access to a color printer. This is what the original 1974 High Voltage album looked like. Pretty juvenile artwork, but I put it inside my High Voltage CD. This has happened with a lot of bands. Triumph comes to mind, where they signed with an international label, and they take their first couple of albums, take what they consider to be the best songs on them, and throw them onto one album. And that's how we got this. And take this out. Yeah, High Voltage. One of many AC/DC album covers that are nothing more than some variant on Angus Young. I like the back cover of this, though. I've always amused by the back cover, where it's got like letters of complaint against the members of the band. Could be real. They could have been made up.
Yeah.
Neither would surprise me. There's not much in this for credits. This is, like I said, part of the 1994 Atlantic reissue series, and this one that I have is a Canadian Columbia House issue, which a lot of these discs are. Nothing at all original with the back cover. It's just the same cover again, and just the information. That's what it looks like on the side. So the old Atlantic disc would be white with red lettering on it, but this is that's how you can tell right away this is a 94 issue.
Right. I actually used to have the American 94 remaster like that in the jewel case, and I moved a couple times and it disappeared. And so I actually got it's a digipack version. I don't know that the remastering is any different. I think just pretty much the packaging of it is slightly different. You open it up and the booklet here sits inside the actual digipack itself. It's got some photographs, a little write-up about the album.
So that's one of the Sony reissues.
Exactly, yep.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more content in the booklet than what the 94 remastered version have. And then the CD itself is not the Atco CD. It's more a custom CD label there. And then just kind of this High Voltage logo here underneath the CD itself. And so I always have trouble, because I like to keep my CDs in chronological order. And the next album, I always have trouble deciding, okay, do I put it after High Voltage or do I put it after Back in Black? Because in North America, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap didn't get released until 1981. It had completely, not surprising, completely different cover artwork than the original Australian version of it, which I am not a fan of the Australian cover artwork of Dirty Deeds, even though it speaks more to the whole concept, right, of the Popeye arm and everything. I've just thought that was a really crude drawing. Not that I'm a fan of the North American artwork necessarily either. But yeah, you again have reproduced the Australian artwork for your CD.
Yeah, the front of it anyway, because of the back cover, if you have the original album, it was a gatefold, I guess, and it the rest of the band are depicted as such here. Yeah, it's really silly is what it is. I put Dirty Deeds right after High Voltage. That's how I do it, because it does have a 1976 copyright date on it, and that's where all the songs hail from. But yeah, you're right. Atlantic, really against the band's wishes after Back in Black took off, because of the confusing nature of their albums. Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap is actually the band's third Australian album, and Atlantic shelved it. So then they decided to put it out, yeah, after the wake of Back in Black's success. That's why, as far as chart stats go, all of the early AC/DC albums, like, well, I would say the pre-Highway to Hell albums, are all platinum or double platinum. Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap is something like 5 or 6 times platinum. And the reason for that is because it did come out in North America after Back in Black. And I think a lot of people thought it was a brand new album. So yeah, you alluded to the cover art. This again is the 1994 Atlantic remaster, Atco remaster, actually, pink on the side there. And so what you have here is, I believe it's the same scene. It's just there's no characters on the back. You know, if you're into cover art at all, this is a Hypnosis album cover. Very Hypnosis, very strange. It could be Pink Floyd, or it could be UFO, or, you know, and chances are this was cover art that they had that nobody wanted lying around, and they
got
just,
it on clearance.
the record company said, "You got anything?" That's the same thing with Def Leppard's High and Dry. I don't think they had anything to do with that album cover. That's a Hypnosis album cover too. Once you see enough of them, you begin to see, oh, I get it. So yeah, it has nothing to do with the album cover. These characters on here, they've all got bars under their eyes, which I guess speaks to the Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. Also, the little black and white photos of the band in here, their eyes are blacked out too, with a black rectangular bar. And the lyrics actually have the lyrics this time. And so this is a different set of songs than the Australian Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. Not quite as drastic as the Australian version of High Voltage, for example. There's like 2 or 3 songs that we would know on the North American version. But again, we'll get to that later. But this has the song Rocker on it, which was on TNT. This is the first time it appeared. And in a very strange case, there's one song on here, Love at First Feel, that wasn't on one of the Australian albums. So I don't know how they got that. Maybe it was a B-side, or I could be mixed up about that, because it is confusing. But yeah, I consider this coming after High Voltage myself, because that's where it fits in musically. And like I said, it has a 1976 copyright date on it. So
it's a fun album. When the songs that I remember enjoying when I was that age were obviously the title track, but then also, Big Balls with its double entendre was something kind of you were into that kind of humor. So it kind of, resonated with everybody at that time that was my age. And an interesting thing that I just recently read about the song Ain't No Fun Waiting Around to Be a Millionaire is that Stephen King, when he was trying to persuade AC/DC to do the soundtrack for the Maximum Overdrive film, he actually put that record on and he sang it line for line to AC/DC just to prove that he was a hardcore AC/DC fan. And that was apparently the trick that got them to agree to do that soundtrack. So I thought that was pretty fun and interesting. And it's, I believe, the only AC/DC album that does not use the AC/DC logo that they're famous for, at least in North America. High Voltage has the, a version of it with, it's a little different. The letter, got the lightning.
It's got the lightning bolt in it. I like that old logo actually, but yeah, you're right. And that just shows like this, just slap something on here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the next North American album and Australian album was 1977. It came out in North America, and that is Let There Be Rock. And the version that I have is the original Atlantic with the white and the red lettering there.
Cool. I've never actually seen this one up close before.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't
So
look that much different from my some of my Led Zeppelin CDs there, or some Yes also CDs. The original release is on there. And then, as you might expect, there's really not a whole lot in terms of the booklet. It's just got the credits there, and pretty bare bones. So
if you notice, like until I think until I'm going to get this wrong, but Atco is a subsidiary of Atlantic. So if you look at the CD, you'll notice that it's got the blue ring around it instead of red. That's
yep,
how you tell it's Atlantic, but it's Atco.
right.
It's the same company, but a different numbering system. Because yeah, you're right. I think 90125 looks like that, and actually one of my Vandenberg CDs looks like that. So once again, a different cover in Australia, and I printed it off. This was just a really, really cheap black and white. And I don't know if you're going to call that the logo or not, but it does have the lightning bolt. So they were starting to get some consistency there. But Let There Be Rock, I mean, that's a very ineffectual cover.
Mm-hmm.
They're not known for great cover art anyway. That's been talked about a lot. But yes, okay. So the second North American release, the first one to feature their classic logo. And that's, you know, the logo, I think, as it would ever be. And I've looked at this so many times, and I've never been able to figure out completely if that's like a painting or if that's an actual shot of the group. I'm not sure. This is the 1994 Atco reissue, and this is actually a retail version. It's Canadian, so the Angus on the back. And again, not much different than what you've got, might even be less for credit. So yeah, so there's no lyrics or pictures. That's one thing about the Sony Digipacks. They do that quite well. They dig up pictures from the time, and then there's always a write-up. This looks like my high voltage CD, and just the back cover. Not much on there too. What is interesting about it is you will see. Okay, no, it's inside of it. They do have the original catalog numbers listed. Originally released as Atco 36151, June 23rd, 1977. They do that all the remasters. It's kind of a nice touch for those that are interested in such things. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so 1978, the next AC/DC album. Now, were these covers the same in North America and Australia, or Power It?
I think this one was. As a matter of
Okay.
fact, I think it's the only one.
Okay. I've got the Sony remaster here. And so, you know, again, they've got the booklet that gets tucked into the Digipack there. Got a write-up, photographs, and then the track listing and some credits. It's a customized CD there. And beneath that, it's another photograph there. And then the back cover. And your version.
So I've got it's another Canadian retail version, and it's the 94 reissue series. Now, for some reason, they didn't keep the logo. They didn't keep the actual logo. They did keep the lightning bolt, and they put Power Age in this distressed, shaky kind of thing. I actually like this cover. It's kind of silly, but I actually like it. I mean, you know, Angus has got like electrical wires coming out of his sleeves. This is what the side of it looks like. That's another thing where you're telling the CDs are different is if you look at the sides. Back cover, just that photo of the band. Now, this is interesting because now this actually, it's the Atco numbering system, but they went back to the old red and green Atlantic look like that was on the record labels. So I don't really know why they did that, but even though it's plainly Atco, and nothing much inside here at all.
And this was the first album to have Cliff Williams on bass after Mark Evans. I think it was a mutual agreement. They decided to part ways with Mark Evans. So the kind of AC/DC's, at least a classic lineup with Bon Scott with this album. And then the next album from 1978 was AC/DC's first live album, which was, if you Want Blood, You've Got It. And we'll take a look at your version first.
Okay. Of course, this has the Angus being impaled on his guitar. They're back to using this logo. This is a Canadian Columbia House version, the 1994 reissue series. I'm still not 100% sure how they did this, but now what's interesting about this, the track listing on here, is that not all of these songs were, I'm just looking through here, not all these songs were available. Actually, no, just the song Rocker, the last song, because the Dirty Deeds album hadn't been released. So when people bought this in 78, they're like, well, I know the rest of these songs, but where's this from? So that was kind of your first indication that there's more, you know, it was pre-internet, and really it was, I can only imagine how hard it must have been to get this information back then.
Mm-hmm.
And the CD again with the Atlantic look to it. Back cover there with the drums. So it's kind of interesting. You see some really, really old like Pepsi cans there. Fun stuff like that in the background. And very minimal in the credits. And a great like raw, you know, live album. It's interesting that I guess it makes sense for the record company to put it out as a single instead of a double, because it's not like they were a big band at this point. They were just strictly an opening act, and they were opening for like Kiss and Van Halen and Aerosmith and building a following, but probably not, it wouldn't have been a commercially successful thing to put out a double live album at this point.
And they weren't a band either that kind of stretched out, you know, their songs into longer, you know, instrumental jams and whatnot, like some other bands did, like Led Zeppelin or.
Yeah, you're right. Except for Let There Be Rock, because I've seen them in concert, and I've seen live clips of it, and that could be 11, 12 minutes of just da 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 to give Angus time to go out into the crowd and do his spins, and after a while it's like, okay guys, but yeah, but you know, you're right, they know what they do it well, and they keep it simple.
Right. Well, the version I got again is the Sony remaster, and so it's in the digipack, which I wish they would have kept the jewel case format, but it is what it is. And I really would have preferred the Atlantic CD label. This is a customized one, but I'm just being nitpicky, I know. This is the booklet, and same as the other Sony remasters.
It wouldn't make any sense for Sony to use the previous labels, artwork. But you're right. Yeah, I agree. And it's funny to me because I always think of AC/DC as being an Atlantic band.
Right.
Even though their last few, the new ones have been on Sony. It's just strange.
Right. And so the next album is their last, unfortunately, with Bon Scott, and that is the Highway to Hell album. And it's the first album that they used a producer who was not the classic team up that they had used before, which was George Young and
Harry Vanda.
Yeah, yep, Harry Yanda. They actually used Mutt Lange on the album, and it's a really fantastic album. It might be my favorite AC/DC album of the Bon Scott era for sure. But what I've got here is the 1994 remaster. And back to the Atco label on the CD. And again, not much really at all in here in terms of credits or just the song listing.
No, my version's just like that, except it's a Canadian Columbia House version, and that's when you get into the small print. Everything else on here looks just the same. Mutt Lange is an up and coming producer really at this time, and boy, he got a good clean sound for them. It doesn't sound like somebody hears it now and think, well, that sounds strange. You know, you're gonna have like the Def Leppard, Bryan Adams, Shania Twain sound. No, not at all. Just a good, crisp, clean studio sound. And one thing I've always thought about, you know, first time I heard this all the way through, is that Bon Scott was improving as a vocalist. Like he was getting better and better and better. Like the guy could really sing. You listen to a song like Love Hungry Man or Touch Too Much, and you know, he was just a great rock singer. And if you compare this to the earliest stuff like TNT, High Voltage, he's getting better. And I don't know if that was Mutt. And speaking of Mutt, you can hear Mutt's background vocals plain as day on Touch Too Much. After the solo, the breakdown after the solo, that's very much the Def Leppard, you know, chant vocal. And I think this might be one of the first appearances of it on this album.
Well, and it wasn't that AC/DC was unhappy with George Young and, you know, Harry's production style. It was the record company actually pushed them to use a producer that was going to help their sound be a little more commercial for radio and whatnot. But yeah, no, I agree. It's really unfortunate. One of the things about I'm talking about Bon Scott's passing when they were really at the top of their game with Highway to Hell. But did the Australian cover have like a fiery cover that was different from?
Oh, you're right. You're right. It's the same band Pose, but there were flames behind them, and I think that there was like a guitar neck that was coming in like that. Yeah, you're right. And Power Age, I forgot to mention this. I think Power Age and If You Want Blood, You Got It, the cover arts were actually the same. I don't think there was any differences. That's the last one where there was any sort of variant to the cover art, but it's not much of one.
Right. It's sort of almost like Street Survivors by Leonard Skinner, where, you know, you had the flame cover and then the cover that didn't have the flames.
Yeah, that's a really good comparison. And yeah, I mean, Highway to Hell was their first gold album in the States. It went to the top 20. Highway to Hell, I think, hit 47, got a lot of airplay on the radio. And they were poised to do something. I think their next album was going to be a platinum album regardless. Who knows what would have happened.
When I think Bon had started to participate in some of the very preliminary recording sessions for the next album, and then unfortunately he did pass away. But you know, what a great introduction for Brian Johnson with Back in Black. Just a tremendous album. It's really one of the albums that defined you know, early 80s rock and roll for me. I mean, you think of an 80s classic albums, Back in Black is right there at the top. It's just such an iconic album. There's not a weak track on it at all. And AC/DC is one of those bands that made a successful leap with a different singer. You know, they were at the top of their game. They lose their lead singer. And, you know, much like Van Halen, you know, 5150 was a barn burn. It was a fantastic album. Just a lot of great tracks and great singles off of it. And same with Back in Black. I mean, I think Back in Black is just a really, yeah, I know I don't have to convince anybody watching this video, but it's just a really great album. This is the 94 remaster. If you had the original Atlantic CD release of this, like the AC/DC is like, it takes up.
It's huge.
Yeah, it's huge lettering, and then you got Back in Black. So
Back in Black took the whole bottom. And the funny thing is, those original Atlantic CDs, you never see those used anywhere.
Right.
They're quite rare.
People know what they have, and so they've held on to them, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of the biggest selling albums of all time. And I love the fact that it's such a great hard rock album, but it broke through to the masses, and people that don't own anything remotely like it other than that album, they like that album. And even though people have heard Hell's Bells and Shook Me All Night Long and Back in Black a million times, they still sound good when they come on. But what's interesting about it, you mentioned the original Atlantic CD. Now they go to this Atco look.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm not sure why. Mine's like yours. It's a Canadian Columbia House issue of it. And I mean, Back in Black will continue to sell till the end of time, I think. Somebody somewhere will be discovering it for the first time and buying it.
Yeah, and I think some people who don't rank it at the top or near the top of their favorite AC/DC albums, I think some of that goes back to just the over familiarity with it, having heard those songs, You Shook Me All Night Long, Back in Black. You know, our hometown Detroit Red Wings use the Hell's Bells, the opening to Hell's Bells whenever there's a face-off. you know, or something that they're anticipating big is going to happen. They play that in the arena and it just gets everybody fired up. So, you know, Back in Black, most people, even if you're not an AC/DC fan, I would venture to say you've heard at least 3 or 4 tracks off here that you're familiar with. And so they stick with Mutt Lange for the final time. They use him as a producer for the follow-up to Back in Black, and that is For Those About to Rock, We Salute You. Another minimalist cover. I think it's pretty effective. I like the brown tone there. It looks like you've got the 94 remaster also.
Yeah, for sure. This is a Canadian retail version. Yeah, it's got the Atco there. And the inside of it, again, is the brown on the back. And then that's you know, it's funny because I remember, like, I have an older cousin that we used to go and visit my aunt and uncle, and he was a huge AC/DC fan. He had a huge poster of this on his wall. Years later, I realized where it came from. Yeah.
And that's what's in the gatefold of the album, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I rank that pretty high, although I have to say the follow-up album, Flick of the Switch, I think really gets short shift after that album, because I actually like this better than For Those About to Rock.
Yeah, I agree.
And,
I agree.
You know, I think AC/DC was back to producing it. They actually produced it themselves because they wanted to kind of get back to that original AC/DC harder sound. They didn't want the commercial sound so much anymore. And I think there's a lot of really great tracks on here. I think Flick of the Switch is probably my favorite track on this album, but there's not a weak track on here. Most people don't talk about this when they talk about their favorite AC/DC albums, but I really think it's one of their better 80s albums.
Yeah, you look like you have the Digipack version.
Yeah, I've got the Sony version of that. It's hard to tell just because it's so white.
Oh, yeah.
Light gray background, but it is a customized color. I like the fact that they keep a black and white color scheme here for the photograph that they use. And then the booklet itself.
Yeah. And this was the last one with Phil Rudd for 12 years. They got Simon Wright in for this tour.
Right.
But Phil Rudd did play on the album. Yeah, I got this is the 94 reissue. I really like this album. And, you know, this is kind of the equivalent one would be Power Age for the Bon Scott era. The albums that are talked about really kind of the least. And I think this is a much better album than For Those About to Rock. There's no radio staples on here, which is probably one of the reasons it's, you know, it went platinum eventually, but at the time it was considered a really, really big disappointment. I think it only went gold coming off of For Those About to Rock, which is a #1 album. And, like Rising Power, Landslide, Bedlam in Belgium. There's just, and there's nothing different about it. Even if people talk about this, like this is the Critics' Choice AC/DC album, there's absolutely nothing different about this. It's just you don't hear these songs all the time. And now they're using this Atlantic logo, which was, I've seen this on a few records. My Rush Presto record has that label on it, but I like it. It's Canadian Columbia House version. And yeah, even though they did produce it themselves, I don't think it sounds that much different than the previous 2 albums. It's just a nice, clear sounding album, very minimalist artwork. But for anyone who's, you know, I like AC/DC. I'm sick of hearing Back in Black and Shook Me All Night Long and Thunderstruck. Check this album out because it's that familiar sound, but you haven't heard the songs a million times. I think you'd be pleasantly surprised and say, wow, this is really good.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely, you know, if you like For Those About to Rock, you like Back in Black, you like really, I mean, anything by AC/DC, that would be the album to pick up if you don't have it as part of your collection yet. But I really consider it one of their better albums. Definitely, you know, next to Back in Black, at the top of my list of the Brian Johnson era albums. And so now in 1985, it's Simon Wright who is now behind the drums for AC/DC, and he was only actually.
Yeah, the record company did
Right
something
now,
first.
my chronology is probably out of order here, but yeah, 74 Jailbreak, which, you know, we're going back to the Bon Scott era again for this EP of tracks.
This is another record company move, because as we talked about all these extra songs that didn't end up in the North American versions, they in 1984 of all years, probably because Flick of the Switch didn't sell as much as previous albums. They were doing a little Damage Control. They put up this 5-song EP, again, probably a record company move to say we can sell this cheaper, and let's see if we can get some exposure to some of these older songs. Even though it looks like they used quite a recent photo of Angus on here, and it's called 74 Jailbreak. It's kind of confusing because these songs are not all from 74, and I've got a 94 remaster. I do like how they've got the logo down the side here, just simple but cool.
Mhm.
And 5 songs. This is Jailbreak is probably my favorite AC/DC song. I love that song. I never get tired of it. I absolutely love the video. Much Music, before I even got into AC/DC, Much Music would play that video once in a while, and I would always watch it because it was just that they did videos before a lot of bands did videos. Like a lot of their early songs, there are videos for, and not just like soundstage videos. There's actual sets, like Let There Be Rock. They're in a church. It's a Long Way to the Top. They're playing on the back flatbed truck. Like there's actual concept videos, and Jailbreak's probably the best known. Back to the red, green Atlantic logo, and the lyrics to the 5 songs. So, and right in front of me, I don't know exactly where all of these come from, but I do know that they all come from the first 3 Australian AC/DC albums. Jailbreak, for example, is actually from Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap. Baby Please Don't Go, their cover of that was like their first Australian hit single. That's from their Australian High Voltage album. And I think the other ones, they're mixed in with maybe the Australian Dirty Deeds, You Ain't Got a Hold on Me, Show Business, Soul Stripper. Yeah, those might have been on the old High Voltage. I'm not sure. But of course, years to come, most of this would have been made irrelevant, but we'll get to that. But yeah, you're right. The next studio album proper came out in 85. But your version of 74 Jailbreak, you've got a digipack there too.
Yep, this is again another one of the Sony reissues. I really like the track Baby Please Don't Go on here. It's a cover version, but it just shows, you know, how versatile they were and really what their influences were when they were starting out, what really their own kind of rock and roll tastes were. And they do an awesome cover of it. With some
old shots there.
Yeah, definitely. But it's a nice album to have, a nice companion piece to the other Bon Scott albums. I really wish they would just reissue the original Australian albums as they were intended. It seems like every other artist, they've managed to correct that. AC/DC.
Well, it's almost like the Beatles, right? The differences between the UK versions and the North American versions. Yeah, it's odd that they haven't, but we'll get to, they made up for it. They did make up for it.
Yep, absolutely. So we're back on track now chronologically, and we've got the 1985 album, Fly on the Wall. Is that a 94 remaster you've got, or is that?
No, actually, this is, because of the way that it worked chronologically, Flick of the Switch was the last of the first wave of reissues. And this is an old Canadian Columbia House version of Fly on the Wall. You can see that immediately by the side and the back, and looking at the CD itself. And so inside of this, it's actually got there's quite a bit here in the booklet. Photos of the group. I noticed things like this. So Simon Wright was new. This is the first album he played on. So the shots of the group, and all of them are on stage except for Simon. It's a studio shot. I don't know why.
It's kind of like in Back in Black.
Exactly. Yeah, you're exactly. I knew you'd go there, because the photo of Brian Johnson is just him like leaning against like a brick wall. The rest of them are shots on stage. Now at that time, it's because he hadn't been on stage with them. But Simon Wright had just done a tour. Did nobody think to take any pictures? It might have been as simple as that. And this actually has all the lyrics. Now what's interesting is because whenever they get to the chorus or the title of the songs in the lyrics, it's capitalized. The production on this isn't great. Again, this was self-produced. Angus and Malcolm produced this. The drums are very messy sounding, and Brian's vocals are mixed way, way, way in the back. There are some good songs on here. Sink the Pink, Shake Your Foundations were singles, videos. Actually, there was a home video that came out with this where it was like I think 5 songs, a total little mini story. And but what I've never understood, this whole thing here, this whole fly, like the eye coming out here, like I know it's an eye, but it just looks funny to me, this little cartoon fly. And this cartoon fly figures into the videos too. It was really, actually, now that I think about it, it was really the first videos they did with Brian Johnson.
Well, and if there's any consistency at all, I'm sure it's Angus Young's eye that they used for that picture of the.
Yeah.
But this is a Sony remastered version, and this is the back with photographs that Tim had talked about. And Simon Wright was only 19 when he joined the band, so he was really, really young. And he did not last long, obviously, with AC/DC, but still. Just photographs right up again, like all the other Sony reissues. So you can really learn a lot of the history of the band just if you happen to own these particular versions of these albums. They do talk a little bit about the background of the album and the lineup changes and exactly what was going on at that time. And so now we are moving into, I guess you could say, I mean, if we're not counting the bastardization of the Australian albums, which were really the early North American albums, were kind of compilations. This was what might be considered somewhat of a greatest hits, although it is technically a soundtrack album. There are only 3 new tracks on it, 2 instrumentals, and then the title track. And we're talking, of course, about Who Made Who. I'm sure we have the same version of this. Yours might be a Canadian issue.
Yeah, it looks the same on the side. Yeah, mine's a Canadian retail issue. One thing that's interesting about this is that instead of saying copyright like 1986 Atlantic Recording Corporation or whatever, this actually just says 1986 WEA Records Limited. And this is the only one that does that. And I've never been sure why. But yeah, it's the soundtrack to Maximum Overdrive. As you mentioned, Stephen King, a huge AC/DC fan. And it's an interesting mix of songs. It almost serves as a best of, but it's a compilation, there's no question. And this has not much in it, just a little bit of credits. And it doesn't say what albums these songs came from originally, except it does copyright the dates on them. It's not really a greatest hits. It does have You Shook Me All Night Long on it. It does have For Those About to Rock. And oddly enough, it's got Sink the Pink and Shake Your Foundations, which weren't even a year old at this point. If it was going to be a true greatest hits, they'd have put Highway to Hell, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, songs like that on there. And it's only a 9-song album. Now, it's cool. The instrumentals are kind of cool to hear what they come up with, because they were commissioned to do those songs for the soundtrack, which is unusual because they usually just do what they do. Who Made Who's a great song. Video got a lot of play, and that's where all of these shots come from the Who Made Who video. And it's based basically around this. There's lots of like Angus doppelgangers in it, and of course the real ones in the middle and all of that. Yeah, it was an interesting time saver for them, I guess, to buy them time for their next album.
Yeah, and any friends of mine who were not totally into AC/DC, but just wanted to have something by AC/DC representative, kind of their 80s stuff, tended to have this in their collection if they had one AC/DC CD that was not back in black. Uh,
Yeah.
really this one. So it kind of served the purpose at the time, as well as providing the soundtrack to that Stephen King movie. And so now we are into what some people consider not the greatest AC/DC album of the 1980s, Blow Up Your Video.
Yeah. Again, like just running out of ideas with the cover art. It's easy to get confused by all of these, right?
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I've got this is an American Columbia House version. I bought this one used. I'm not a big fan of this album. I think they picked their singles well. The two first songs in there, Heat Seeker, and That's the Way I Want to Rock and Roll. Great tunes. But overall, this is what most Atlantic CDs look like, especially at this time. Another thing that I'm a little bit confused about is that in 1988, if you look at most albums on Atlantic Records, they have the 40th anniversary logo on them. So I wonder if this album wasn't meant to come out in late '87 and they had all the printing done. But if you look at Winger's first album, if you look at I think Rat, Reach for the Sky. I'm thinking of ones that I have in my collection, but they'll have the Atlantic 40th anniversary logo on them. So this came out in early '88. So I'm guessing they already had the artwork printed up. But anyway.
And they did go back to their original production team of
Yeah.
George and Harry for this.
Yeah. And it was the first time they had done it with Brian Johnson. And that's all that's in it for credits, which for a 1988 CD is kind of, this whole back thing, that's just how to take care of your CDs. That's kind of filler, really.
Yeah.
And this is the last album and tour that they did with Simon Wright.
Yeah. And this is the, again, a Sony reissue. And interestingly, this is the first one where the booklet is not, there's not like a little area to tuck the booklet in. It's actually on the inside of the digipack there.
Okay.
So photographs, write up, some memorabilia and singles. So
it's funny, their album, they always did well on tour.
mm-hmm.
They never had a period where they weren't doing well on tour. That album actually went platinum for them in the day. I think all of them since went platinum, but yeah, the fan base has always been there for them, even if the album that they had out currently wasn't the best. They probably only did 2 or 3 songs from that album live anyway.
Right. Well, and AC/DC is one of those bands, you never had to worry about them like some other bands, particularly, in the early 90s or in the 90s, worrying that, are they going to try to be like the grunge bands, or are they going to try to be like new country, like some bands like Bon Jovi or Def Leppard, where, they kind of lost the plot a little bit.
Yeah.
In the 90s, where grunge and alternative was really taking hold on the radio. AC/DC, you knew pretty much every album coming out that it was going to be AC/DC. They weren't going to try to change up their style. They weren't going to try to go commercial. You really got consistency for the most part from album to album. And so their next album, they turned to Bruce Fairbairn, who had done some production work for Aerosmith and also Bon Jovi, speaking of, the Razor's Edge.
Big comeback for them. This was the first album that anybody my age was into. AC/DC were like this older band, like everybody's older cousins, older brothers, like the rough, tough guys were into. But all of a sudden with this album, it became like, really, it didn't sell that much more than what came before it, but the impact it made, all of a sudden it was cool to like AC/DC again, probably for the first time in 9 or 10 years. And this album was a huge comeback for them, even though it doesn't sound like a Bruce Fairbairn production to me. But yeah, this is, I think this is, for a certain age group, this was many a fan's first AC/DC album, because Thunderstruck was everywhere. Money Talks was their highest charting single in Billboard. It got to number 23. And, you know, I mean, if we're getting this time of year, we're filming this. A lot of rock radio stations play Mistress for Christmas. The version I have here is a Canadian Columbia House version on Atco. The disc was a little bit personalized, and not much in it for, again, no lyrics, which AC/DC is a band you probably should have lyrics if you want to know what's being said, but yeah, very minimal credits. And this was the only studio album that Chris Slade played on. Chris Slade, the bald drummer, if you remember the Thunderstruck video, he was in the Firm with Jimmy Page, Paul Rogers, and Tony Franklin. He also played with Manfred Mann, which is interesting. I didn't know. I don't know much else about Chris Slade, but that was his sort of, you know, credentials. But so somehow he ended up on that album, and a period that was very, very successful with him. And he actually ended up on the Rock or Bust tour when Phil Rudd was incapacitated. We'll put it that way. Chris Slade was asked to come back and do the tour, which is kind of interesting.
Right. Well, this album, very importantly, like there's the hard rock station in Detroit that I listened to in that period of time. You know, they were all playing the Nirvana and the Pearl Jam and the Soundgarden and the Stone Temple Pilots. And yet they would also play AC/DC. They'd play Thunderstruck. They'd play Money Talks right there in the same playlist. They would have the AC/DC on there. So it just showed they could stand toe to toe with all the up and coming alternative bands that were dominating the radio back at that time. And it just really, I think, speaks to AC/DC's staying power. I mean, what other band that began life in the early 70s were you hearing on those radio stations in the early 90s?
Yeah.
AC/DC really was the only one. So I think that's fantastic. But this is the, you know, again, the Sony version of that. Photos, again, everything that was in the other Sony's version, just some more interesting pictures. So yeah, so Chris Slade leaves. Well, he didn't leave. He actually ended up getting replaced. But was he on the next album? Was a live album, AC/DC Live. Is he on that live album?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And actually, this is because I didn't get it right away. This is the only one of the Sony reissues that I have. AC/DC Live came out in 1992. Again, produced by Bruce Fairbairn, which is interesting. Even though it's a live album. And this is the 2003 Sony reissue. At the time, I remember it was released in a single disc version and a double disc version. Now I got mine used, so this is kind of ripped. So that's the inflatable Rosie, for a whole lot of Rosie, of course. Customization on the CDs. And I know a lot of people that got this album just because it was the one that followed up the Razor's Edge. And plus, you got a live greatest hits, essentially. But yeah, this has the booklet, basically documents that era. Let's see. Yeah. And if anybody's played the AC/DC Rock Band video game, I think the versions of the songs on there are all based off of these.
Okay.
Which I tried playing it once and I did terrible at it. They're all faster than you expect them to be. And anyway, but yeah, it's I never listened to this. I actually never listened to this. But if they put out a two-disc compilation album with these songs on the studio versions, it would have sold a lot, I would think. But they've never really done that.
Mm-hmm.
There's something, but never really done that.
Right. And so what happened was Phil Rudd happened to, I don't know if he met with the band backstage or just happened to run into them and kind of lobbied to get his job back. And so AC/DC did welcome him back. They said farewell to Chris Slade, who was not very happy about it. And in fact, he was so disgusted at the way that all went down that he stopped playing drums for 3 years. And so Phil
It
Rudd,
sounds like you read the same.
what's that?
It sounds like you read the same interview that I read. I've got I'm looking right at it. It's the illustrated history of AC/DC, high voltage rock and roll. Do you have that? Yeah, that's
I
exactly where I
don't
read
have
that.
that. I don't have that. I actually saw on Wikipedia. Uh,
Okay, I think that's where it comes from.
yeah, Chris Slade, saying that he was so bitter about just the way that he was replaced. Probably felt the same way that the two members of Kiss when the Kiss reunion happened. It was like, well,
Yeah, Eric and
got the
Bruce.
original guy back. Sorry,
But I think AC/DC, they strike me as not being the best communicators. So he probably found out with a fax or something like that. But
right.
yeah, Chris Slade stuck around long enough to play on Big Gun from Last Action Hero soundtrack, 'cause he's in the video. But yeah, at a certain point, Phil Rudd came back.
And that certain point was Ball Breaker, which
Yeah.
was their album from 1995. And this was on East, West, and Epic. So
So the version that I have, East West, is what Atco morphed into in the early '90s. It was kind of a strange record company switching heads of state, whatever, and it ended up morphing into the Electra numbering system as opposed to the Atlantic numbering system. The same thing happened to Dream Theater. Any band that were on Atco, it became East West. The version I have is Canadian Columbia House version, but by this time they're probably very similar. I actually really like the artwork inside of this. It's pretty cool. Yeah, we got the same disc. It just looks different here.
Yeah.
And again, here it is, grunge alternative in full swing. AC/DC hadn't put out a new album out in 5 years. Again, a platinum album. They just defy. They're like only one of those bands that really made it through that whole era unscathed. They never really had peaks and valleys in their career. Like, you talk about bands from the early '70s that survived into the '90s. The only other one that comes to mind is Aerosmith, but Aerosmith bottomed out in the early to mid '80s. And again, AC/DC did it all without changing their sound in the least.
Exactly. Yeah, and this might be my favorite album cover also for Ball Breaker. I think that makes a great T-shirt.
Yeah, it's for an album, for the fact that they've just got, Angus on there, there is a little bit more work gone into it. All of the artwork, I'm pretty sure, was done by Marvel Comics. Is it Jim Shooter? Let me see. No, wait. Comic art, just says comic art provided by Marvel. And you can tell that by the whole, even the font. But yeah, the lyrics are all printed up in Comic Sans. And
yeah, they took
very, very cool
packaging on this album.
Yeah, they really did well on the packaging, which they didn't always. Hail Caesar is probably one of my favorite AC/DC songs. I love that one. This is an album I guess I need to go back and explore a little bit more. So some good stuff on here. Burning Alive is good. The first single was Hard as a Rock. That was good. The song Ball Breaker is pretty good. Yeah, good stuff on here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, it's, classic AC/DC sound. And at this point, they're starting to spread out the length of time between studio albums. And so in 1997, they come out with the first AC/DC box set, and it's really a tribute to their original lead singer, Bon Scott. And I believe you have it, Bonfire.
Yeah, I got two things from '97. I'll talk about Bonfire first. Hyped it up a lot. Now you can get it in a digipack probably where it's, CD sized, but I like the old box sets. I got this at a Columbia House. One of the great things about being in Columbia House, if you kept an eye on things, sometimes they'd have their box sets on sale for half price. Now I will say this, I understand it's a tribute to Bon. Like Bon Scott would joke around, yeah, when I get to be a big rock star, I'm going to do a solo album and call it Bonfire. That's why it's called that. So that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know about you, but I think it's a very strange collection in a lot of ways. Like it's really, so there's a lot of good stuff on it though. So the first disc one is live from the Atlantic studios. It's literally them recording in New York, I think, in New York City for Atlantic execs. It's like a live concert with hardly anybody there. And it's a really cool live set of early AC/DC. The next, well, it's disc 2, but just 2 CDs. It's actually the soundtrack to the Let There Be Rock movie, concert movie, which came out, I think it came out in 1982 originally, but it was from the 1979 Highway to Hell tour in Paris. And I think for trivia buffs, I think Judas Priest opened for that show. I think you can see that in the video. So that's actually the first time that just the audio was made available, which is kind of cool. Disc 3, I wish they'd done more of, but again, they make up for it. It's called Volts. And it's got some alternate versions of songs. Like the first track on it's called Dirty Eyes, but it's actually an early version of Whole Lotta Rosie with different lyrics. And really, the only thing that was of much value to me was the fact that they put School Days on here, which is a cover of Chuck Berry song, which is on the TNT album. So without having the TNT album, at this point, you did have all the songs that were on it. I just didn't know it at the time. And disc 4 is Back in Black. It's just a print of Back in Black, the biggest selling album of their catalog that they don't need to push any further. I know it was a tribute to Bon Scott. I get it. But like I said, a very confusing box set, but what's in it is pretty cool. And I actually learned a lot about the band from this. The one thing I don't have anymore that came in this was a bottle. It came with a bottle opener with the AC/DC logo on it, and I think it came with some guitar picks and a sticker, which is on one of my guitar cases. Came with this big poster, 2-sided poster. So that's the album cover, or the box cover, and then there's one just of Bon Scott. And like all of these box sets at the time, came with quite a booklet. Now here's what's funny. I ended up giving the copy of Back in Black in here away. So eventually, what I'm going to have to do, I'll probably have to buy like the Sony Digipack, or more likely, if I'm lucky enough to stumble upon one of the old Atlantic discs, and I'll just pop that in here. Oh, I still got my temporary tattoo that I never used. That's still there. This is the live from the Atlantic Studios, which is kind of cool.
At the high voltage.
Yeah. The Let There Be Rock movie soundtrack, which is pretty cool.
Which is funny. It's supposed to be
there.
They just used the. Yeah, it's supposed to be the Bon Scott tribute album, and they airbrush him out of the original picture that was on Let There Be Rock. And it's Angus.
This disc itself looks kind of cool. I like that. And this is the one that I listen to the most because it's got some different stuff on it, and it does have different takes of songs. But I wish they'd have put more of it on there. But in the booklet, goes into a lot of detail about the early years of AC/DC and the struggles, and playing the dive bars in Australia, and eventually how they got signed to Atlantic Records, and just some life on the road with Bon Scott. My favorite is this picture here at the end. I would have guessed it's Bon passed out. It's just kind of tragic in a way, but
considering how he died,
but and it talks about getting, it only talks about the Brian Johnson era very peripherally. It kind of comes to a cold stop in 80, 81. But again, a cool box set. Is that one that you've got, Jeff? Or?
I don't have it. I'm familiar with it, but again, for me back in the day, it was, do I really want to make, at the time, I imagine that box set probably retailed for around $50 or $40, $50, and it's like, well, I'm getting Back in Black, which I already own, and which AC/DC fan that's going to buy that box set doesn't already own it?
Yeah.
And so I never picked it up. It's something that I probably will, if I can ever find it used somewhere, like in one of the record shops that I go to, I would definitely pick it up. I haven't yet, but it's certainly on my want list. But yeah, I think with the exception of the Back in Black, I think it's a really great tribute to Bon Scott, and there's some really interesting, cool stuff on there.
Yeah, if they'd taken the Back in Black out and replaced it with more of the hard to find songs, it would have been more worthwhile. But I'm glad I got it again, and it was on East West. with an Electra numbering system. So they're still in the Warner Group at this point. They haven't switched to Sony. The other thing I was talking about, in the late 90s, there was a lot of these tribute albums that came out. I mean, a lot of them. And a lot of them, excuse me, had the same bands or same musicians on them too. One of the best ones I think, is this one's called Thunderbolt. And this came out on this label called D-Rock Music. All of them were produced by Billy Sherwood, who was a member of Yes at the time, and he wasn't, then he is. Now he's the bass player. But all kinds of musicians from the 70s, 80s, hard rock era doing AC/DC songs. And I actually think there's some pretty cool things on here. For instance, this was one of the first recordings that the reunited Quiet Riot did. When the Metal Health lineup reunited, they cover Highway to Hell's first song on here. So it's Kevin Dubrow, Carlos Cavazo, Rudy Sarzo, and Frankie Banali. You got Sin City on here with Jack Russell from Great White. It's essentially, it's Jack Russell, Mark Kendall, and Sean McNabb. It's essentially Great White doing Sin City, which is a fantastic AC/DC tune, and it's a great version of it. There's a version on here, it's essentially Ugly Kid Joe doing Ride On, and Whitfield Crane sounds almost exactly like Bon Scott on this. It's actually kind of freaky how much he sounds like him. One of my favorites on here is Shake a Leg with John Corabi on vocals. Billy Sheehan is on it. It's really cool. Lemmy sings It's a Long Way to the Top, which you can already hear what it sounds like because it's Lemmy singing It's a Long Way to the Top. You can kind of hear it in your head. Dee Snider does Walk All Over You. Yeah. Sebastian Bach's on here. But the main reason I bought this when I did is because Dave Meniketti sings and plays on a cover of Night Prowler. So, I mean, Y&T, one of my favorite bands. And at that time, they were just getting back together. So this was something to hear from him before I heard the next Y&T album. And actually, on that song and a few others, oddly enough, the drummer is Simon Wright. So even though he didn't play on the original versions, I'm sure he probably played them live. So like I said, I've had more of these and I've gotten rid of some of them. This is one I've kept because I actually think it's pretty good.
Is that still in print?
I doubt it. I doubt it. It would be, but it probably isn't going to cost you a lot of money used either.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we're now into the new millennia and we've got the 2000 album, Stiff Upper Lip. And mine's a digipack, but yours is in the jewel case there. I think
this is the last album they did for East West before Sony took over their catalog. And I still remember this. I was at home and it was like February of 2000. And I had a rock station on. I was listening to it and the title song came on and I could tell right away it was AC/DC. Is this new? Because again, I didn't have easy access to internet at the time. And AC/DC weren't a band they just weren't doing that. So I was, this is a brand new AC/DC song. So that was my way of knowing that they had something new out. This is actually, I got this from Columbia House, so it's Canadian. And this was the last one to be produced by George Young, who, for those that don't know, is Angus and Malcolm's older brother. He's since passed away. And yeah, 2000 was kind of like, there weren't a lot of great albums come out that year, so it was kind of nice to have AC/DC back. Interesting packaging here. Not really much going on as far as content, but and you know, it's an okay album. I like the title song well enough. Safe in New York City is a fun song.
Kind of ironic considering it was a year before 9/11.
Yeah, well, it's kind of fallen out of favor. That's just one of those things. Satellite Blues was another single and video. But yeah, this was the end of an era as far as them being, signed as the Atlantic Group, the Warner Group since 1976. This was it. And slowly but surely you started to see those digipack reissues. And all of a sudden, all the previous CDs, even the 94 remasters, you don't see them anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And this is a reissue. It's on Columbia. It's got the customized CD label there. It's got a write-up. And, credits. So yeah, I wouldn't have thought this would have been an album that they would have, reissued, same as the other Sony reissues that they had done, but they did, and that's what that cover looks like. And so that actually was recorded at Bryan Adams' studio in Vancouver. I read that album was. So
Yeah, the Where. That was the first. I think every album they've done since then was recorded. That's called The Warehouse.
yeah.
So they've got an affinity for Vancouver, which is interesting. I mean, Bruce Fairbairn died in 1999, which makes me wonder if they weren't planning on working with him again, but had already booked the studio. Maybe
Well, I
not.
think it just,
But
Bruce Fairbairn had just done The Ladder by Yes. Wasn't that
yeah,
the last album that Bruce did?
John Anderson and like his secretary are the ones that found him.
Okay.
Yeah, they were in the midst of producing The Ladder. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're on to 2008, and they are on to a producer, Brendan O'Brien, who is kind of more known for like some alternative acts like Pearl Jam. He had done Stone Temple Pilots, so really not known for doing kind of, a hard rock band, the likes of AC/DC. But this was the last album, I think, with Malcolm Young, Black Ice.
Yeah, it was the last album he played on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's interesting because they did the Sony deal. They did the Sony deal, did all the reissues in 2003. They did a really cool DVD set called Family Jewels in 2005. So they're on this new label, and it's another however many years before a new studio album comes out. They work at their own pace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, I do not have a copy of this album, but I know you do. So if we can see your copy.
It came out, I believe there's an orange version and a yellow version. There were different ones. I think the thinking was that some people will collect all of them. It was a #1 album. It was the first #1 album they had since For Those About to Rock. Maybe a few too many songs on here. It's got 15 songs on it. If they'd have trimmed it down to a 12-song album, might not have seemed, I don't know. Rock and Roll Train's a good song. That was the big single. That was a lot of people knew that song right away, which is kind of interesting. People were waiting for AC/DC. This is embossed. It's like a book. It's kind of cool. And the booklet, it's one of those ones where the booklet, and I'm not crazy about this either, where it is attached. And the disc itself, and I hate when bands do this too, is like, to me, this is like asking for it to get scratched. It's almost like they want you to have to buy it again. I actually saw this tour, and the band was great live. And I think they did 3 or 4 songs from this album. It's like I said, it's not a bad album, but it probably could have used a little bit of editing. But on the other hand, when they only put out albums every so often, give us everything you got. Whatever it is that you've got working on, let's have it.
Right. In 2009, just a year later, they come out with their next box set, which is called Backtracks. Again, I do not have that one, but I believe you do.
It came out in several formats. I got the cheapest format because there's a format that actually has a working amp on it, which is kind of cool. The one thing because I bought this used, I'm not sure how it originally came, but this thing always comes off of it. This is like an outer sleeve. But I will say this. This is what Bonfire could have been. This, finally, for the first time, collects all of the stray tracks from AC/DC's career. I'll go through it here. Opens up like this, got an old logo here. And it's a 2 CD, 1 DVD set, at least the version is that I have. Came out on Sony. Here's the booklet that came with it. And it's got all kinds of ads. Actually, there's more pictures than anything, but there's a lot of old ads, which is kind of cool. But the main thing, and the main reason to get this is because disc 1 is called Studio Rarities. So it's got Stick Around, Love Song, Fling Thing, R.I.P. Rock and Peace, Carry Me Home, Crab City in Blue, Cold Hearted Man, which are all Bon Scott era tracks. And I don't know right off the top of my head which comes from what. I know that R.I.P. Rock and Peace is on Dirty Deeds. Crab City in Blue is from Let There Be Rock. Love Song is an interesting song. It's the only ballad AC/DC ever did. You wouldn't even know it was AC/DC if you weren't told. Stick Around. Those songs are from High Voltage. So, yeah. Snake Eye and Borrowed Time are both B-sides from the Blow Up Your Video era. I think down on the borderline is a Razor's Edge era thing. Big Gun, which is nice. They put Big Gun on here from Last Action Hero. And Cyberspace, which is a bonus track from Stiff Upper Lip, and I think it was the B-side of the Stiff Upper Lip CD single. Live Rarities on CD 2. And what a really nice touch is that the DVD is Family Jewels Disc 3. Now, this is the opposite of putting Back in Black in Bonfire. This is value for the money. This is assuming most AC/DC fans already had the Family Jewels set. So that set went from the beginning to the Razor's Edge. This one starts off with Big Gun. It takes all of the videos in from Ball Breaker, Stiff Upper Lip, and Black Ice. There's a few bonus videos on here too, and some live stuff. The Making of Hard as a Rock, The Making of Rock and Roll Train. It's a great set. It's really, really worthwhile for AC/DC fans. And again, it catches you up on all of those, I call them stray songs. I love just the simple cover, but yeah, there's more deluxe versions of this. This one is worth seeking out in some form or another.
Right. And so the next album that came out, or the next release from AC/DC, was technically their second soundtrack album from 2010, which was the Iron Man 2 soundtrack.
Yep.
I don't believe there's any original music on there, is there? It's all previously.
No, it's all. This is AC/DC's greatest hits. I mean, this is the closest you're going to get to a best of AC/DC. This supersedes Who Made Who as far as the disc that one AC/DC fan might want, because it's got Back in Black, Thunderstruck, Highway to Hell, Let There Be Rock, Have a Drink on Me, TNT. It's good. It's really, really good. They put Cold Hearted Man on here, which is cool, because before I had it was Great Tune, which is from the Power Age Australian album. There's a DVD on here of there's some old videos on here, but there's a lot of live ones. Shoot to Thrill is one of my favorite AC/DC songs. They made that into a single, but actually it's not really a soundtrack. It's just an AC/DC compilation, because in the movie itself, you hear Shoot to Thrill, and I think either Back in Black or Highway to Hell. That's it. It's not like it's just full of AC/DC songs. There's a good write-up in here too.
Yeah, it's like AC/DC's greatest hit, sponsored by Iron Man 2.
Yeah, like I don't know how this came to be and how they became affiliated with it, but it's cool because, I like AC/DC and I'm a fan of the Marvel movies. So there you go. They're together in one place. But yeah, this is like Black Ice. It's like a book. I don't know if there's any other versions of it. I would imagine there's probably deluxe versions, but this is pretty cool. This is a Canadian. Well, it was bought in Canada, but it's American. I think they just got too lazy to make their own, so they just imported them. But yeah, if you need one thing by AC/DC, I mean, yeah, if you were assembling a true best of, it would be a little bit different, but this is pretty good. And it does give you a little bit of taste of, this got Guns for Hire on here, Evil Walks, the song The Razor's Edge, which is great. Yeah, good collection.
Yeah, so that'd be the one to have if you're just kind of dipping your toe into AC/DC and just kind of want the best of the best without also a couple of deeper tracks on there as well. And then in 2012, another live album, Live at River Plate, which is an interesting name for a venue, but
it is, yeah, and it's in where is it? Buenos Aires. I think it's in Buenos Aires. Could be wrong. I got to be perfectly honest with you. I bought this used. I don't actually think I've ever listened to this. I got to fix that. This was recorded on the Black Ice tour. I've seen that tour, so I probably can guess what it'll sound like. There it is. And this again, it's on Well, actually,
Is a track list
this
what you remember from that tour?
pretty much, yeah. This actually is like a foreign version because it's not. Oh no, it's on Sony Music. Okay, it's getting harder to tell what the actual labels are. Pretty substantial, thick booklet that came with this. I like this better as an album cover than just another shot of Angus. But yeah, it's it's the train. I remember that. Yeah, it's good stuff. I mean, they don't sound different night to night. So yeah, this is probably pretty much what I saw.
Mm-hmm.
But I should probably listen to it.
One of these days, yeah.
One of these days, yeah, one of these days. So yeah, next, as far as I know, it's time for another studio album. There isn't much left.
Yeah, no, it's 2014. The Rock or Bust album came out, and now AC/DC is on Columbia. So we got the lenticular cover there, which is very cool. And Stevie
Yeah.
Young is now on bass guitar.
Rhythm guitar.
Yeah, I've actually got a version actually of. I realize I didn't keep it with my other CDs. I've got yeah, so that's I've got that version too. And then what happened was I ordered a CD on eBay and it didn't come. And so I was pretty sure that it had gotten lost in the mail and I wasn't going to get it. So I picked it up on Amazon, and the version I got on Amazon ended up being the Columbia version, like what you have. And then the CD did finally come in the mail, and it was Albert production.
Is that from Australia?
It is.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
And on the very back there, it's got the Albert production little logo. Also.
Yeah. I just got the, whatever one, I got this off Amazon, I think. It's just the Columbia version. And yeah, by this time, Angus Young was suffering from dementia. So Stevie Young took his place, who's a nephew. But the way that Angus Young explained it, they came from a very, very large family. So even though he's their nephew, he's not that much younger than them because they've got older siblings. So yeah, this is actually what the cover of the CD booklet looks like. I was never, like I talked about this in the episode that we did not too long ago on Power Up, was never big on this. But one of the things I never understood is why they bothered doing a photo shoot when Phil Rudd was in prison. I mean, he was in legal trouble. Why did they bother even doing that? To me, it looks just pointless. It's like, why did you bother hiring a photographer? Just take some individual shots or find a stock shot. Because I mean, it isn't that they don't credit Phil for playing on here, because they do. And again, this was recorded in Vancouver. Yeah, and important of all, thanks to Mal, who made it all possible. So Malcolm Young alive at this point, but not doing well, and he would eventually pass away in, I think, late 2016 or 2017.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it was 2017, but
yeah,
no, just down to all things that don't make sense in terms of record packaging. It was probably a record label decision. I got to imagine that group shot, because it really doesn't make sense, but maybe they got pressured into it.
Or they'd already hired the photographer and said, well, we're here, let's just take some pictures. And it's funny because, love the band, AC/DC, they're just a bunch of normal looking guys, and yet they always insist on having their pictures.
Right. Yep, absolutely. And so I think for most of us, we really thought that might have been the end of the AC/DC album with Brian Johnson. I don't think any band would have been surprised if AC/DC had just kind of folded up their tent and just kind of faded quietly away. But very happily, if you've heard the album, they did come out with a new album, Power Up. I know we have the similar version. The only difference are Hype Or positioning.
You know what? I think I like where you put yours better. This isn't bad, but I used to save all my hype stickers and they got to the point where I had such a hard time getting them off the plastic. But this one I did save. Yeah. I mean, we went in depth about this album not long ago on one of my episodes, and just a pleasant surprise all around. You know, it's a good album all the way through. You don't get, you know, a lot of the AC/DC albums, later albums, would be two or three standout songs, and the rest that wouldn't necessarily be bad. Just, you don't remember them; they're not memorable. You know, I love the packaging in this. It's they just did a video for one of my favorite songs on your Demon Fire that just came out. So, you know, and again, like Black Ice, it was #1. It's the third #1 album, and not only did we kind of think collectively as fans think they folded up their tent, why on earth would they come up with a new album this year when they can't tour to support it? But they did, and I'm so glad they did, because it was like a breath of fresh air, you know, hearing.
I think it surprised a lot of people because I think expectations were very low. Like, what is this going to sound like? Brian Johnson, you know, obviously he didn't leave because he wanted to. I think he was having some, you know, certainly issues with his health. And then just a real surprise, much like I think the Deep Purple album that came out, Whoosh, was a surprise to a lot of people, pleasantly so, because that's a great album also. But I'm not a fan of these digipacks where they tuck them into the middle of the gate.
Yeah.
Because invariably, you know, you have to shake them, they fall out, or you got to reach in there and pull them out. But in every other way, I'm happy with that particular CD. And Tim has a great review episode of that particular AC/DC album. If you want to go a little bit deeper, it's a roundtable discussion. So if you're really interested in hearing a more in-depth track-by-track review of that AC/DC album, definitely check that out on Tim's channel. Tim, thank you so much again for joining me and showing your AC/DC collection, which is you know, filled in all the gaps in my collection. So I do appreciate that. And you're an AC/DC longtime, you know, fan, as am I. So I always enjoy talking music with somebody who's got a passion for it like I do.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Jeff. It was a lot of fun. And it's, you know, when you go through them like this, inevitably, before I put them away, like, oh, I should listen to that. I should listen to that. So, yeah. Now, maybe someday they'll do a series where they actually reissue those Australian ones. I don't know why they haven't, like Sony hasn't recognized the value in doing that. But I bet you they will yet in some form or another.
Because fans will buy it. AC/DC fans pick those up because it'd be the first time they were available. So I think from a financial standpoint, they would make money on it. I'm certain of that. But well, thank you everybody for watching, and again, thank you Tim for joining us, and everybody enjoy the rest of your weekend.